Shoot. Thank you for joining us again, Candice.
Right.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. How's the week going so far?
Fantastic. I attended a deal structure seminar for 4 days of crunching numbers and making things work, learning how to do it in an upside or downside market. And I just feel like a different person.
Yeah, it sounds like a very interesting information, like because there's so many unknowns right now that a lot of folks got to be very got to take a lot of we call it experiments, right? Just like America is this big experiment. We have these changes in the real estate space on a micro and macro level. You know what I mean? So what was some of the big takeaway during that seminar or conference that you went to for underwriting?
There is a very delicate, it's actually not that delicate, but there's a good balance. There actually is good debt. And then in an off market, just make sure that you're able to get equity partners in. So you lower your debt and increase your reserves. And those having those key elements in having an equity partner, not necessarily thinking about keeping all the cash flow for yourself, is just distributing some of that will help you ride out a downfall on the market. And it was a spreadsheet that we broke up in groups and we actually crunched numbers with scenarios of all different types of assets and how to make it work and how to look at our debt ratio and know when to bring it down and when to bring it back up. But it took the 4 days to really to do it, and we're meeting up. People that were in the group are meeting up to practice outside of the group.
Got you. Yeah, it's always good to be in a group of like-minded folks who are seeking, similar goals and also growth for themselves and their family, right? And those are always great conversations to have and great rooms to be in. So now you mentioned that they are, making the numbers work, and we see that a lot of folks that beat us out of deals are what we believe to be overpaying for properties, right? So we can do anything to make the numbers work, but it being good stewards of our investors' capital, right? What are some of the guidelines that they gave during that conference or seminar to ensure that you're not being overly risky or being conservative?
Well, it would be, you can pay retail. You don't have to, as long as you're making a profit and just have the cash flow. That's what you pay attention to, not trying to get, you don't always have to, yes, it's wonderful to be able to get an under market, or off market deal, but you can still pay retail and make money. But if it's not going to cash flow and you're overpaying, those people that are buying those properties like that, I mean, maybe they're just buying for appreciation, but if you buy for growth and income at the same time, in early stages of investing, that is, you can still find those deals out there, and you don't necessarily have to just stick to one asset. You can do it in any asset. But because we're here on multifamily, the numbers have to work. So if the numbers don't work, don't get caught in the race, because if they're not working for what you structure, then your deal structure is not, it's not your business profile. So you should just walk away from it. There'll be another one.
That's right. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing with us. We're about almost 10 minutes past the hour. So we had significantly more people signed up, but they might trickle in here shortly.
And where's all the
So
regulars?
they'll be here. All right. So without further ado, so if you sign up for Meetup, you had the luxury of reading Eddie Wong's bio. So I was first introduced to Eddie Wong on the Dealmaker Mastermind meetup on Tuesdays, and he offers a very unique perspective that, to your point, Candice, some underwriter have the luxury of having a capital stack that does not require a lot of growth, a lot of interest, or a lot of cash flow, right? And all they're looking for is to preserve their capital. So Eddie as a different not really a different perspective, but he have firsthand view of exactly what that looked like, and pretty much our competition as far as the capital stacks go. You know what I mean? Because look, we do everything we can to ensure that we are staying conservative, right, with the capital stack that we have access to. But there's a different group of investors that not a lot of us are tapping into, right? So Eddie's gonna share some insights on what he's witnessing. You know, so without further ado, I mean, Eth, we got some administrative notes.
Not that I can think of right now.
Okay. All right. So for the new ones, Heath and I, we're business partners, and we buy apartment buildings in the southeast with our friends, right? So friends, because we make extra effort to ensure that the people that we choose to invest with us are actually real people, or actually decent people who have an idea of where they want to go, and we are the best fit for them, and they are the best fit for us as well. You know, so we buy apartment buildings in the southeast with our friends. Additionally, we are committed to donating 10% of our acquisition fee to nonprofit organization that benefits our veterans, right? So that's where we are right now, and thank you for joining us today. And without further ado, Eddie Wong.
Hello, hello. Good to meet everybody. Thank you for inviting Hutch and Heath. So I heard good things from you guys. I've been looking at your deal. So, congrats on, you guys making it. So, I would like to actually, talk a little bit about fund investors. So should I bring up the slide, Hutch, on my
Yes,
end, or
Heath's about to make you co-host right now.
Yeah,
My
okay?
apologies.
you should be good to go.
Okay. Yes, sir. Bring up the slide.
You got
Okay.
it.
Can you guys see this?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so fund investors. So as you can see, right behind my name, CAMS. So I am a certified anti-money laundering specialist. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of perspective on, fund investor and why the banks are so concerned about these fund investors. So let's talk about foreign investor mindset, right? What are their strategy? Exactly like Hutch said, right? They have capital that they made from their business, right? Foreign investors in other side of the world. I'm currently sitting in Macau. So I'm on the other side of the world. I work in Hong Kong, but because of COVID, I'm stuck in Macau. So my family's in Macau. So, a lot of investors in this side of the world, they are, they make money in their own business, right? So once they make their money, they want to preserve their capital. So they want to invest in property because, for the Asian mentality, buying a property is the main goal, right? They want to buy property, they want to actually purchase something, and they could actually, you know, look at it grow. And, as you can see, right, accessibility to opportunity. Every opportunity on this side of the world is appreciation, which is the third point, right? So to put it into perspective, a apartment in Hong Kong, not in central area, right? But in a area that is a little bit out of the way, maybe 15-minute, 20-minute out of the central area, by train or by MTR. They call it MTR, which is the subway similar to New York, right? That particular apartment, 550 square feet, it costs $1.1 million USD, right? So 550 square feet apartment is people's bedroom in the US, but we have to pay, $1.1 million for it, right? So that's how expensive real estate are out here, right? So, everybody is all about appreciation. There's no cash flow. With that type of market, right? Similar to the coast in the US, New York, San Francisco, California, right? Those are appreciation market, right? So in that sense, you buy high and you're hoping that it goes higher, right? So everybody in this side of the world, the price that they bought it in, for the last 10 years, it's been going up and it never came down. Maybe it came down a little bit, but it always goes back up. So this is what they're looking for. This is their mindset. This is all they know. Appreciation, appreciation, appreciation. Okay. So how do they invest in their home country, right? So they buy it for appreciation. We all, including myself, right? I own some properties out here. I buy for appreciation. I even have to go through negative cash flow to keep the property. Expense higher than my rental, right? We buy it to keep it. A lot of them buy it for their own usage. So multiple generations would, basically help each other out and buy properties out here, right? So, but they're hoping for that appreciation. When they sell it, they make their money, right? Short-term investment, but not flipping. So a lot of them are looking for short-term type of investment. They buy it and they hold it for less than a year or maybe a little bit more than a year, and then they sell it. But it's not flipping, right? There's no, there's no remodeling, there's no major upkeep, there's no major things that they do to the property. They basically buy it and re-rent it out, because in this side of the world, the rental market, it goes so quickly, right? So I had an apartment up for rent, and within that afternoon, somebody moving out in the morning, within that afternoon, I had 3 showings. Somebody came in and rented it. So literally, I had no time off in my rental. So that's why, they all have this mindset of short-term investment. So when you start talking to foreign investor, they all have this mindset, especially being in Hong Kong, being in Asia, they have this mindset that things like this happen in real estate, but it doesn't happen in the US, as you all know, right? Second home for extended family, exactly. They all think about the importance of owning a home, right? I'm pretty sure in the US, everybody think about ownership in the same way, right? But in this side of the world, multiple generation, grandparent will help the parent, parent will help the kids, kids will help their kids, and then they will help even cousins and different family members, right? So they all pull in their money. So, you might ask, how do they afford these expensive apartments, right? This is how they do it. They pull in their money and they help each other out. And then they, put down the deposit, and then they buy the property so that they could get into these expensive properties. Okay. Hold on. So foreign investor mindset, what are their concerns? For me, I'm an American. I grew up in New York. I lived in Vegas, and then I got transplanted to this side of the world. So, I have some knowledge of the US market, right? But most of the investors in this side of the world have no knowledge of the US market. They think of US as one market. As you guys know, US is not one market. There's multiple sub-market, there's multiple different market from East Coast to West Coast to Central, right? So there's so many markets in the US. People on this side of the world think US is one central market and that's it. So they have no knowledge. There's no exposure. There's no, and it's impossible to manage for them, right? As you guys, investing in a foreign state, in a out of state investment, right? Sometimes it brings you concern if you don't have boots on the ground. But for foreign investor, sometimes they can't even get to the US because of visa problem. So when they start investing in US, they think about all this. So, getting there might be a problem. Repatriate a fund, right? Once they get their money in the US, how do they get it back? They have to have a bank account. They have to have, different things in place so that they can actually get the money back into their home country if they want to, right? But the thing is, for a lot of them, they want it out of the hand of the Chinese tax system, right? In the Chinese tax system, there's a lot of unpredictability, right? When you talk to, especially inside China. So Hong Kong and Macau is a little different. We're under a different economic system, but within China itself, right? They got a different tax system where they are really concerned of the unpredictability, because they could freeze your account, they could do a lot of things that you won't see it coming, and they could do it very, very quickly. So to preserve some of these capital that they made from their business, they want to get it out of that system. So, but the Chinese government put a lot of controls on capital flight. So in the recent time, they put even more stricter control to avoid places like Macau, which is a gambling mecca, having those funds transfer into Macau. Because once you get into Macau, it's a lot easier to get it out of the country. So tax, domestic and international. So taxes, there's a tax treaty between different countries, US and different countries around the world, right? So you don't have to pay double tax system. But with that said, right, once you start investing in US real estate, you foreign investor will have to pay US taxes, meaning they will have to have a tax ID, they will have to have an ITIN number, sometimes they even have an LLC, right? But your US income will be accumulated with your other investment. So if you also invest in stock as a fund investor, all that get accumulated and you will have to pay taxes on it and capital gains on it. So all that, when you start talking to foreign investor, they are having these big concerns because before this, they could kind of skirt by without paying some of these taxes, right? So that those are not accumulated in such a big way where you have to pay a huge amount of taxes. But when you start making income, regular income from like a syndication with Hutch, right? When you make regular income, they make their distribution. As a syndicator, Hutch will actually have to withhold the taxes that the foreign investor will have to pay. So Hutch, as a syndicator, that 30, excuse me, that 30% tax withholding, Hutch are responsible to withhold it and give it to the government. If he does not withhold it, Hutch is actually responsible for that tax. So being a foreign investor, when you start taking funding from a foreign investor, you have to watch out for all this. And you have to have the infrastructure to deal with it. So how are US real estate, hold on, sorry. How will a US, I can't see the top, sorry about that. How will US real estate purchase affect foreign investors tax? So US require all foreign investors to report their income. Like I said, right? That 30% withholding is a requirement. Once you get your tax ID, the US tax system have information on you, meaning that any income that you make in any other way in the US with Lexus to the US are taxable. So that 30% income is a major concern to foreign investors. So when I start talking to foreign investors in this side of the world, right? They go, Eddy, you're the American, you're gonna have to pay US taxes. But if I were to invest with you or invest with, any of your partners, I'm subject to that tax. And, with that 30% tax, the income that you made, let's say, 8% or 7%, whatever percentage that you get, 30% right off the top, it goes straight to the government, right? So you're actually making less money than a regular investor. So when they're thinking about it, they go, hey, you know what? It's not actually worth it for me, right? So you have to kind of think about it when you start talking to foreign investors. You have to think about this this problem that foreign investors run into. On top of that, right, there's a lot of issues. For American, we could actually invest with our, social security number, but for a foreigner, they can't just invest, right? They got to set up, they got to get a tax ID. They got to get their information to the U.S. government. Some of them have to actually get an LLC to kind of, limit their tax liability a little bit, right? So in additional, there's a 10% withholding in a separate account for any foreign investors, and that will report for the annual taxes. So basically, you have to have the infrastructure to kind of build it in for your foreign investor when they are investing with you so that you have the tax withholding, or you are responsible for it. So you don't want to be on the hook for some of these taxes that they are responsible for. So can foreign investor buy individual direct ownership, right? So this is what they need to do. They need to get a tax identification number, an individual tax identification number, which is the ITIN number. And then they also have to file a real estate tax, a foreign investment real estate tax withholding. So this is a actual report that they have to file with the IRS. So when they actually go through their income, these are all withheld on their behalf. So if the property is rent out, so all this are tax withholding that they have to go by. So as a fund investor, they are responsible for this tax. So the U.S. government are always on top of it, even if you're a foreigner. So you have to actually apply for all this to make sure it happens. So upon the sale, there's also another 15% on that. So all this is a major problem for foreign investor when they think about investing in U.S. So how do you buy real estate, right? You could buy it through a LLC. Like I said, including myself, right? I'm a U.S. citizen, but buying a property using LLC. But for some foreign investor, they have to go this route, right? To limit their tax liability, because they also do not want liability from these properties. So, in additional to the tax side, they don't want liabilities. On this side of the world, we don't have the suing culture, right? In US, we have a suing culture. So everybody sue everybody for everything. So there's always liability when you own property. In this side of the world, when you try to sue somebody and you loses, you have to pay the court fees and the lawyer fees in this side of the world. So that suing culture is discouraged, right? So US don't have that system. So in that sense, the liability is on the investor. So they don't want that concern. They know this in their, when they understand the infrastructure, and then they have to build it in so that they protect themselves. One of the best ways is to actually, utilize the LLC. Right, bilateral treaty, like I said earlier, right? There's 68 countries around the world that have treaty with U.S. So this limit your tax liability for double taxation system. So it goes from 30%, which is the whole amount, to 5%. Depending on the country that you're in, you have these tax treaty that lower your tax liability. So this is the form that you will have to file with the IRS, W-8 then. So this is to basically limit the tax liability for double taxations. But it's very important. It goes to the ITIN number that you, as an investor, has to actually put in when they're investing with you. Immigration visa. So have you guys ever heard of the EB-5? So the EB-5 is a investment visa for foreigners. So for foreigners, for them to actually invest in US, they also sometimes want the opportunity to move to the US, right? So as an investor, they could actually invest in an EB-5 visa program. So as you can see, the amount for investment is 1.8, but it's been reduced to $900,000. So as a foreigner, they have to invest in a property of that amount, property or business in this amount. And then they also have to have a targeted employment area, or they also have to employ 10 full-time individuals for 2 years. So this comes into audit. Sometimes the problem when you have EB-5 visa problem is the investor invests in a business and they stop employing 10 employees for 2 years. And when the audit comes, they actually fail the audit because they didn't employ 10 employees, and they lose their visa status. So a lot of them would like to invest in this way so that they could get to US. But depending on where you're from, I've spoken to different lawyers, right? So lawyers in the US told me, as a Chinese national investing in EB-5 visa program, it would take them 10 to 20 years for them to get that visa. So it's near impossible. When you're speaking to an Indian national, I heard it goes to 100 years. So it's pretty crazy to actually invest in the EB-5 visa program because it's near impossible to get a visa. So, but this program is still out there, right? There's still a lot of people pushing this program, but you know, for investors that don't know a lot of these details, and when they invest in their business or a real estate program that do not employ 10 employees for 2 years, when they go through the audit, the visa actually fail. So there's a lot of these scams going on in this part of the world where you know they tell the investor that if you put in the money, you will get your visa. But when they're actually going through the filing process, they find all these details out. 10 employees, the line that actually get you the EV5P's visa is over 10 years. So there's a lot of these problems, and people get scammed all the time in this side of the world. Anti-money laundering concerns. So this is my day job, right? So the BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act, right? They have strict control over anti-money laundering requirement. So when you start dealing with foreign investor, that's one of the major concerns for financial institutions, right? When they accept money from a foreign individual, they're always worried about money laundering. They're always worried about, you know, individual, you know, trying to make the cash somewhere else, and then they bring it into the US market and clean it up and send it to somewhere else, right? So, you know, by BSA will put a lot of infrastructure together. So to make sure that the financial institution that is accepting the funds in your bank account have these controls into place. So, you know, you have to identify the individual that's transferring money in, the purpose of transferring that money in, why you're accepting that funds. So all this should be documented on your end if any question comes about from your bank, right? So in that sense, you should know who you're dealing with, you know, to be safe, right? For my side, to be safe, you should do some background check if possible. You should get their ID, you should get their passport, you should get their residency, you should get their contact information, right? All this is pretty basic, but you should also really document it and protect yourself. When you start dealing with foreign money, there's a lot of concern by the banks. So when there's a problem, right, there's a suspicious transaction report that the bank have to put in to the U.S. government, FinCEN. So in that sense, they will ask you for this information. They will ask you for that contact information. What's the purpose of that transfer? You know, as you can see, right, in New York, Miami, shell company are purchasing luxury real estates, right? But they are making major concern in the US government because there's a lot of shell company that is owned by individual, let's say political, Malaysian, right? So to give you a little bit of background story, the $1 billion Well by Brady Hope and Tom White, this is about a story about the Malaysian prime minister purchasing a property in the US. So, you know, you guys seen Wolf of Wall Street, right? There's a story out there that there's a huge money laundering process of a Malaysian prime minister basically laundering money through this public funds, and then they start buying different things with it. They start buying a yacht, they start buying a movie, they start buying luxury real estate, they bought a whole bunch of handbags. So that book is basically about money laundering that could happen with these shell companies. So how they are actually making that happen is they purchase these property with shell companies. So these different shell company is very, very hard to identify who is the actual owner of these companies. So in that sense, they purchase all these property, they purchase all these assets, They purchase these luxury products. Nobody knows who actually are purchasing these items. So that's all I have. Let's go through questions if you guys have. Do you guys have any particular questions that you would like to ask about foreign investors, and what are your concerns? Have you ever had any conversation with foreign investors?
I got a question. I was a little confused when you were talking about the withholding that you as the syndicator had to do, and if you didn't, you were responsible. Is that, to which government are you paying that tax? Is that the tax to get it back into the foreign country? Or is that tax to the United States?
In the U.S. So how it works is, for a foreign investor, if they start investing with you, right? I'm a foreign investor now. I am invested with you. Without a tax ID number, I cannot invest with you, right? So I gotta get a tax ID number. I gotta get maybe my LLC set up and get everything set up in that way. So once I have all that, you make a distribution back to me. You are responsible to withhold 30% of that amount before you give it to me. If you don't have that infrastructure, and I go, you know what, I'm a foreign investor, I take the money, I run, right? I transfer it back to my home country.
I see what you're saying.
You are responsible. You are responsible for that tax.
Right.
To
I see.
the
It's like
IRS.
if you were to cash out a 401k or something, they hold back some of that money to pay the taxes on it.
Exactly. That's exactly the same way. So you are responsible for that tax, and you have to withhold it for the foreign investor and pay it on their behalf, so that they don't have it in their hand. And then they could get it back. Don't get me wrong, right? They could get it back through tax filing. So, but the thing is, a lot of them don't want to go through the hassle. They got to go through an accountant. They got to find an accountant. So there's a lot of hassle for foreign investors, especially like right now, I'm looking for an accountant myself, right? But being physically on the other side of the world, it becomes difficult. For you guys could walk into any tax accounting, firm, and you can ask for help. For me on this side of the world, it's a little bit more difficult. And for people who's not connected, and have no connection in the U.S. side, it's even more difficult.
So if you have a foreign investor, you said you got to think about their concerns, and some of their concerns is how they're going to get the money back out of our country.
Yes.
How would you go about addressing those concerns? Or how hard is it to get money back out of the U.S. to foreign countries?
So it's not all that difficult if you have the infrastructure already set up. So they have to have a bank account, right? And if you are not transferring money from your account to a foreign country, then it might be a little easier, right? If you transfer to their bank account in the US and they are solely responsible to transfer money back to themselves, then it's a lot easier. But once you have to think about how you as Heath or your company, will transfer money directly to a foreign account, then you might run into some BSA problem, right? Anti-money laundering problem, right? So they might withhold, they might ask you a whole bunch of questions. Why are you transferring this fund to this individual? What's it for, and all this stuff. So meaning the documentation part is pretty important, right? So when you get them on board, you get all that information. That's the important part. You have all that information. It's not for the purpose of, they ask you question in between. It's for you to get the money back out for them, right? Because by then you might lose some of that relationship, right? Because it could be 7 years down the line. It could be, whatever time it is, you might lose some of that relationship, and you no longer have access to that information. So it'd be a little bit more difficult to get it back to them in that sense.
Right. So it might be a good idea if you are a syndicator in the United States, working with a foreign investor, to say, hey, we could help you out with the process of getting an EIN, setting up an LLC, and getting your own bank account, for which we could then transact with our US bank, with your US bank. And then you are able to then be in complete control of getting the money from your US bank back to your foreign bank. Would that
Correct. That will probably be the ideal way, So I have a advisory business on this side of the world to do exactly that, to basically line them up with an accountant, line them up with a lawyer, and then maybe help them out in setting up a bank account. You know, once they have all their tax ID information, once they have all that. But exactly like you said, right? You could do that easily. To connect them. Once you're having these conversations, you built that infrastructure for them, right? So
Yeah.
that they can actually do this without having that problem. Because having that problem is a major concern. They can't get their money out. Having in your bank account, you cannot easily transfer it back to, themselves. So it might be difficult. And, for a lot of foreign investors, they don't know the US market, right? I started a meetup in Hong Kong because there's nobody doing it. There's no multifamily meetup in Hong Kong at all. There's real estate meetup, but there's no multifamily meetup at all.
All right, we got a question here. Do most foreign investors want to keep their money in the US? Would their subsequent investments be just as difficult and subject to the same withholding requirements?
Some of them want to keep it in US, right? So capital flight problem is the major concern, right? By keeping the capital in US, it's outside of the Chinese taxing system, right? So yes, some of them do want to actually keep it in US, but with that said, right, that you have to pay taxes on it. But once you get it into your bank account, you already pay your taxes on it because of all these withholding, right? When somebody pay you already, there's always withholding already that's already calculated in. So once you have it in your bank account, you're pretty safe. And once you have it in a bank account on the US side, you could actually transfer it elsewhere, right? You don't actually have to keep it in US. Once it's in a financial system that have transparency, then you could transfer it elsewhere. And this is their major concern, is getting their funding out of that system where there's no transparency, right? You could have, your account frozen the next day and, literally for political reason. So, in that sense, there's a lot of Hong Kong political connected individual that have their account frozen because of the changes in the regulations in Hong Kong. So in that sense, you want to get it out of the system, right? So, but once you get out of the system, it's kind of tricky, right? They would try to actually force you to get it back into the Chinese system. They would do different things to kind of, pressure you to get it back. But that's another story.
All right, we got a hi, thanks for your insight, Eddie. If a foreigner sets up a US LLC, are they still subject to the withholding tax?
They are always subject to the tax withholding.
Because they could take the money and run.
Yeah, there's no way around it. Regardless of what you do, there's nothing you could do to get around that, right? As a foreigner investing in US, there's nothing you could do to get around that tax withholding. What you could do is you could limit your tax liability by setting up an LLC, right? As you guys have, passive losses, right? You guys have expense. You guys have different things that you, as an investor in multifamily, have, right? The foreign investor could also use it, but they use it in their LLC. So you can limit your tax liability, but you can never get away from it. Yeah, it's always a pain.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
Now, if you do have an investor from Hong Kong and they want to invest in one of your multifamily deals, you just mentioning you can set those things up for them. Would you set it up as like a 50-50 deal? I mean, set up an LLC where you're 50% and they're 50%, or just set up the LLC where it's purely them?
Ideally, you set it up as purely them, right? You don't want to tie yourself to a foreign investor where you are also subjected to that tax, So ideally, they set it up themselves. You help them out to get it in that LLC so that they can invest with you, similar to a US citizen, right? They would give you the tax ID information or the LLC tax ID information or the Social Security. So once they set up the LLC, it's similar to a US investor. But then you got to think about the transfer of funds, right? Are they transferring money from a foreign account to you directly? Do they have a U.S. account? Without that infrastructure, they can't have a U.S. account. So it's like a chicken and egg problem, right? You have to set up all that stuff up, and then they get the money into the U.S. and then they invest with you, right? So it's a major hurdle for foreign investor to get their money into the U.S. So once they get into U.S., then there'd be no problem.
All right, we got due to the tax issue, would you recommend a foreign investor to be an equity partner instead of a lending position?
So equity partner, lending position. So depending on, what the investor wants, right? Exactly like US, right? Depending on what their needs are, right? The equity position, you might have appreciation at the end, right? But on the lending position, depending on what they want a cash flow, that's why you got A and B investment, right? On syndication. Different investor got different profile. So it all depending on the investor themselves, but you got a little bit extra layer of complication, right? There's the tax withholding. Once you put them on the lending side, there's tax withholding, any interest that you pay them, tax withholding on top of that. So, for a fund investor, they got to think an extra layer when they, should they go on the equity side or should they go on the lending side? So it all depending on the investor profile. Sometimes they want their money in the US, right? They got kids going to school in US. So, they got to transfer money into US anyway. So once they actually have the money in the US, they don't have to think about that concern of transferring money, right? Sometimes you got kids carrying cash and, when they actually taking a plane ride, back to the school, and they got to report it. But, that's a major risk. You don't want your kids to have that amount of cash when they're traveling. So, having different investment portfolio, having different way of getting money back in the US for the purpose of their kids. Yeah, it all depending on the investor profile. Yeah, different conversation I've been having is, they are more concerned about their kids. So a lot of Chinese investor, including myself, we invest to think about our kids. So, different things that we do to kind of, set up our next generation kind of thing.
All right. All right. Okay. So taking on foreign investments is taking on risk. If I'm getting 6 to 10% average realistically in today's US multifamily, what is the average return I am seeing in the foreign multifamily? Am I getting higher returns for more risk?
So foreign investment, multifamily in this side of the world, or what are you referring to? Or multifamily in the US side for foreign investor, right? There's no there's no
Eddie.
multifamily in yes.
I was gonna say Edward can unmute and ask the question if he wants.
Yeah,
Multifamily
talking about
foreign.
apartments on the foreign side. It's not
Oh,
really
okay.
like
So there's no multifamily structure in this side of the world, right? It's all the big boys. It's financial institution, it's insurance company, it's banks. So those are the big boys, that could invest. Because if we're talking about multifamily, right? You got apartment buildings that have, hundreds of, thousands of units, right? But each unit costs $1 million. So in reality, you can't really invest in multifamily in this side of the world. Most of that is usually a development game, right? You purchase the land and you develop and you sell, right? If you want to invest in this side of the world, multifamily, especially Hong Kong or Macau, other area like a little bit, maybe like places like Cambodia, different places that is less expensive, right? Then maybe you could start investing in multifamily in this side of the world, right? But in places like Hong Kong, that's near impossible for individual investors. So when I start having these conversations about multifamily, they don't even understand what it is because this product does not exist in this side of the world. You buy single property. You buy apartment building, you buy one single unit in an apartment, and the apartment costs $1 million, right? $8.4 million Hong Kong. You know, that's the property price that, you know, I recently actually just sold at, right? So that is one expensive apartment. And it's not even in a central area. If you're talking about central Hong Kong, right? That apartment could go from 15 mil to about 45 mil. And this is regular apartment, right? You know, we're not talking about expensive apartment that is for luxury living. You're talking about regular folks just like you and I. The apartment that I sold is a 2-bedroom for 550 square feet. And you know, you got a family member with 1 kid living in it, right? You know, that type of size is so small, but that is normal living in Hong Kong, right? So, you know, rents are expensive, real estate are expensive. Good thing is food is not all that expensive. So, you know, you gotta, you know, kind of figure out the difference to live in this side of the world.
Thanks, Eddie.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to invest in this side of the world. So there's a lot of issue when you're a foreigner investing in this side of the world. On top of that, as a foreigner, you cannot get mortgages normally. So, you know, you can't just normally invest. Places like Singapore, you can't even invest as a foreigner, right? They won't allow foreigner to actually own real estate. So in that sense, it's near impossible to invest in this side of the world in multifamily. If you could get into a development, then yes. If you could get in with a group that started the development, then yes. But as an individual investor, if you're looking for these opportunities, I looked, don't get me wrong, right? I looked in Cambodia, I looked in Vietnam, I looked in Korea, I looked in Malaysia. All these are single unit investment, right? So in that sense, it's really difficult to actually get a multifamily, you know, unless you're a institution, you know.
So Eddie, so if the foreign investor already have their money here in the U.S.,
Yes.
for example, I got an investor that's in South Africa, went to
Hmm.
school here, went back, and so on. So their money is already sitting here in a U.S. bank, and they want to invest in the multifamily. Walk me through that scenario and if that works.
So that one is a little bit easier, right? Because the money is already sitting in a U.S. account. So, you know, the transferring process, the BSA, the anti-money laundering concern are already gone, right? Because the money is already in the U.S. financial system. So in that sense, then your investor will actually have to set up the infrastructure to invest with you. As a foreigner, ideally, they set up an LLC so that they limit their tax liability as much as possible with any passive loss that you could actually generate for them. And in additional, any expense that they could actually you know, occur during the investment process, they can limit their tax liability. So it's essential for them to set that up so that they limit their tax liability. And then on top of that, get an accountant that deal with foreign investor so that, you know, they have the infrastructure to deal with the tax filing. On your side, once you take on that money, you need to make sure that you have all that buttoned up, right? Because if you don't, you are on the hook for that tax. So you do not want to be on the hook for that tax. You want to make sure that you have all that documented and all that buttoned up so that, you know, that infrastructure for you and them is essential. Without that, then you're kind of on the hook for it. So you don't want to be on the hook for it for somebody else's taxes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Tons of great information. Saya, and I know you on the other side of the world. Anything to add? Are you dealing with any of these situations, my brother?
Can I ask one more question?
Please.
How many people on your side of the world are actually looking for syndicators on this side of the world to do deals with? And how many of them are on the scale of being able to invest on the lower end? And, you know, is it just big money people looking for big money US syndicators? Or do you have people around our same levels looking to buy real estate in there, and they're looking to connect with people? And how do you find those connections or find those people and start doing business together?
So that's my goal, right? My goal is to actually try and make that happen, connect to both sides of the world, right? So as for me, I'm a regular individual. I invest in property in this side of the world, but nothing cash flow, right? So I want to invest in US. There's a lot of individuals just like me, but the thing is, they're not going to spend the time like me to kind of sit in these Zoom meetings and meet all of you guys, right? And get to know people like Hutch, get to know people like yourself, and make these connections, right? Because everybody's busy, they got their day job, right? I want to make a business out of this, and that's why I'm investing a time into it, right? But for them, it's very, very difficult to make these connections. So for them to invest, they have to feel comfortable, they have to know who you are, right? And that's hopefully that's where I come in. I can actually develop these relationships. I can make these soft intro where it shortened their review time, their due diligence time for them to get comfortable with a syndicator. So because me, I'm already sitting in this side of the world, I can actually meet them face to face. I'm a real person, right? So, but for them to actually meet you, they got to get on a plane and travel there, or you got to get on a plane to travel here. So it makes it a lot more difficult, right? So I'm hopefully with my advisory business, I could build that bridge. How you make these connections. I try to join as many meetup as possible, right? As you can see behind me, I'm part of Toastmaster. So, that's another way to actually meet different individual with different mindset, right? With Toastmaster, a lot of individual that, I'm the president of this Toastmaster called Founders. So Founder Toastmaster is basically set up for startup individual that have business and they want to actually enhance their communication skills so that they could talk to their investor, they could pitch their business and actually, get fundings for their business. But that's the purpose of Toastmaster, right? But when you start getting into, different groups of these people, they also have the same needs as I do, right? They want to invest, they want passive income, they got their regular business to worry about, just like me. That's why I try to join as many of these clubs as possible. And I also have a meetup in Hong Kong with MFM to kind of, get some of these like-minded people together to kind of invest. And, around me, I got a lot of lawyers, compliance officer, accountants, so that I could, basically get in touch with them and have these discussions. And hopefully, if they have some of these concern about investing and passive income, right? Just like US, everybody works really hard, right? And they don't have time for anything else, right? But, in this side of the world, people work till like 9, 10, 11, right? Almost every day, which is crazy, right? They don't even have a personal life. And when you start talking to them about retirement, they go, what is that all about? What's retirement? My retirement is I'm going to live on my saving. My kids is going to take care of me, right? I go, that's impossible, right? Look at the expensive real estate that we live on, right? If you don't own your own home, you got rent that is costing you, $4,000, $5,000 a month US, you know, that amount, how much can you last on savings, right? When you're living in this side of the world. So a lot of individuals looking for retirement plan in different way. We got something similar to 401k, but it's not as much. It doesn't pay as much, right? There's retirement plan, but it doesn't pay as much. There's public health care, right? That's one concern. But when you speak to an individual that's in the public health care system, they have to wait 2 years to get a surgery done that is essential, right? In that sense, yes, there's public health care, but you gotta actually work the system, right? So in that sense, it's difficult. When I have these conversations with foreign investor, they go, that's a pipe dream for me, right? Living passively on income that is on investment, that's a pipe dream. So, when I start talking about this stuff, they go, cash flow, what is that? We buy property on appreciation. We're hoping we buy it and we hope it goes up. If it doesn't go up, we lose money. But that's the mindset of foreign investor, right? Because that's only thing they know. And how I got myself, into multifamily is because of this. I was looking for a different way, right? And I have connection to US. I start looking into it. And the only way to get these type of cash flow is, investing in market that have cash flow, right? And this side of the world is nothing like that. So, when you start talking to foreign investor, the education part is pretty important because a lot of them don't even know what all these means, right? When you start talking about multifamily, they go, "What is that?" They have no idea what that means because this product doesn't exist, for the individual investor. It's available. Don't get me wrong, but it's for institutional size, financial institution, banks, insurance company, different huge family offices, right? Those are the people that are investing in multifamily in this side of the world.
Gotcha. Hey, one question before moving to the meetup. Actually, I want to get Sai's input on this as well. So, Eddie, is there a threshold of money that can move out of, say, for instance, China or Hong Kong? I'm not sure if you already covered it, but
That's a good
um,
question.
go ahead.
Yeah, 50,000, 50,000 on the so in that sense, right? So for Chinese investors, right, they can only transfer 50,000 per year per individual. So when you start talking about investment in $100,000, $200,000, for a Chinese investor, they gotta get a group of individuals to help them transfer out 50,000 per year. And if you have kids that's already, need the fundings in the US, that amount already taking into it. So meaning if your kids have to go to school and pay tuition, you got to transfer money into the US, you got to go through that system. So you only allow 50,000 per year for Chinese national. But for Hong Kong individual, there's no limit, right? We could transfer as much as we want because we're in a different financial system. Macau is the same way. So, a lot of individuals are looking to get their money outside of the Chinese financial system. And that's the reason why, because, you don't have the opportunity to invest when you only have 50,000 to invest. And that accumulate for everything that you do in the US side. If you make a trip to the US and you have a bank account, you transfer it to yourself, that's part of that 50,000. So in that sense, it's a little bit more difficult. There's a lot more hurdle for foreign investor when they start investing in US.
Great information. Appreciate you, Eddie. So, our good friend Sai is in that region. Sai, I know you invest in the U.S. as well. How's that working out for you, my brothers? What are some of those constraints that you're facing?
Yeah, no. So thanks, Hutch. Good to see you, Heath, and everybody. I'm currently in Cambodia, actually, but from Indonesia. So everything that Eddie's saying is absolutely correct. It's not very easy for foreigners actually to invest in Asian countries. There are ways and means. I mean, in Cambodia right now, you're not allowed to. Foreigners can't own landed houses, but they're allowed to own apartments. Single, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedrooms. So I would absolutely say that actually a lot more people do want to invest in the US. So, these sorts of, questions and information about withholding tax is very, very important because obviously, like I think even investors from the UK, where my family's from, but also Australia, they're looking at the US as a great, great country, great market, because you can invest a smaller amount of your capital and get some pretty decent returns in terms of cash flow. So, I appreciate your insight, Eddie. Thanks very much. Hopefully we can connect. I'm in Phnom Penh. So
Oh,
hopefully there's,
very
yeah.
nice. So I'm in the casino business. So yes. So yes, Cambodia is a casino town also.
All right,
So
gentlemen.
definitely
Great.
connect.
Yeah, greatly appreciate the inputs, and appreciate you all for joining us. So, what we typically do, Eddie, will you be able to stick around for
No, I got
That's
a
working?
work meeting, so I
You
think
did
I
say that.
have to
Okay.
go. Yes. But
I appreciate.
thank you for the invite. You know, I appreciate that, you know, I could share some info. You know, feel connect with me on LinkedIn. If you type in, you know, I think Hutch already put it up.
Okay.
Feel connected to connect with me anytime. Send me a message. We'll try to connect. I'm a little bit slow lately in connecting with different individuals. I got a lot of work responsibility right now, so that's why I'm a little slow. But please connect with me.
I appreciate it, my brother.
All
Thank you.
right.
I'll see you guys. Bye bye.
All right.
Great
Take care.
job, Eddie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.